So welcome everyone. We're here in London. We're in trendy Shoreditch recording this podcast, and I'm joined today by Nathan Morris, the Regional Vice President of Sitecore. Welcome.
Hi.
So first question, maybe you can just briefly introduce yourself and your organisation, Sitecore.
Yeah, sure. So Nathan Morris, as you said, I'm one of two regional vice presidents of Sitecore UK and Ireland, being top right-hand corner for what traditionally has been in the Martech space, the CMS platforms. So the platforms that have traditionally been websites. So go back 20 years ago, the first thing all the companies invested in was websites before everything else. And now we've transformed and all the rest, which I'm sure we'll come on to at some point. But for me, then Nathan Morris, then live in Bath, born and bred in Bristol, spent 10 years of my career in London, working and living in London, living the dream, and then realizing couldn't sustain that, and then moved out to the Bath West Country region. So yeah, 5 years in Sitecore, 4 of those years as a enterprise seller, sales professional by trade, 20 something years as a individual contributor, and in this last fiscal year, then I changed direction career-wise and moved into sales leadership.
What I really loved as you were talking there was just about how you described yourselves as a sales professional, which is something that sometimes people don't want to talk about. And how you analyze the organization as, the product that you are there to sell, that, is this something that organizations, top organizations are going to want? And is it a growth business? And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who'd be looking at your 5 years and saying, well, over the course of that 5 years, you must have been very successful and you must have sold this product to lots of organizations. But how do you do that? I mean, yes, as you've described, you've got a great product, probably the best DXP in the world. But that's not enough. You've still got every company out there in UK, Ireland you can talk to. And how do you not be that annoying salesperson on a call or on an email? I mean, for those type of people who maybe, respectfully at the other end of their career and they're sort of, starting off on this.
I'm not at the end of the career.
No, you're always, midlife. Anyway, let's say they're graduates, right? So they're starting out, they're thinking, how do you do, yes, I've got a great product, but how am I a salesperson? Like, what do you do? How do you catch attention? How do you get traction? How do you know the right things to go for and time waste? Maybe help us understand what's made you so successful at Sitecore.
I'd say success in Sitecore is arguably the same as success anywhere else that I've been, which doesn't mean I've been successful in every organization I've been in, which is also part of life lessons, that timing is also key. But I spend quite a lot of time now that I'm in a sales leadership role, talking to people. And I spent quite a lot of time in my previous role, which is probably why they thought I'd be appropriate for the job if I was acting that way anyway. But talking about the basics, and it's odd to me that people in a sales role do not do the basics. What do I mean by that? And I tell my teenage daughters exactly the same, by the way, that if you set expectations, deliver on those expectations, or say what do what you say you're going to do, top and tail it with manners, please and thank you, it's surprising how far you can go. By doing that alone, arguably makes you an elitist in 2023. Or 2015 or 2000. It's so basic, so basic. But most people don't do that. So the average is below saying, please, thank you, communicating normally, asking questions, being curious, delivering up on answers, not trying to force a product down someone's throat, actually understanding whether there is an opportunity to be to work with someone or not be too hasty to throw up acronyms to people because you've been on a training course, which there's a tractor beam to do for sellers traditionally is what I see. So there has always been an opportunity to excel at selling by doing the basics. Now there's probably a work ethic there as well, and from childhood then I have a history of or learning the life lessons about working hard and then excelling, certainly through music and sport. If you take the music example, then I went through that curve that lots of kids do, but did get to the end of all the exams, and realized towards the very end of that 10-year-ish journey that as much as I enjoy performing as a natural performer, it was only in the last couple of years that I learned that all of the technical exercises, the hard work that's boring, it was that would make me ultimately successful and be that much better at performing. And if you apply that model to sales, then the reality is if you write a list of all the things you love doing as a seller, and number one is going to be selling,
Okay.
and at the bottom of the list is all the deemed menial, boring things, or the stuff that's not as attractive, which is, I don't know how much is relevant nowadays, but prospecting, if you put that as a bucket, prospecting, whatever that translates to at the moment, but outreach, then you always have to invert that list. Because if you love selling as a salesperson, I am never going to have to say, "Oh, George, you've forgotten to sell for a month. You've probably been busy trying to sell for a month whilst taking your eye off the ball of all the other stuff that's lower down on that list," which is why inverting that table is, as a simplistic, rule, is so crucial. And if you focus on the things you don't like doing, then you make sure that everything else just follows through. So I guess it's probably going a bit off piece, but I'm not a big believer in peaks and troughs. Don't particularly agree with it. I certainly know I know that there's probably a maximum amount of engagements you can do competently at one time, which may mean when it's at its most concentrate, other things on that list may slip slightly. But I learned most of my sales life lessons in my first two companies that I was in, particularly my second one. And it means that you actually have to carve out how are you going to spend your 20 days of the month. So 20 working days in a month. How are you going to spend that time?
Yeah, a lot of that really resonates in terms of talking about peaks and troughs. I used to have a boss who used to say, the actual sale or the revenue is a lagging indicator. That's about the work you did 6 months ago. Just like, I don't know, climbing a mountain. It's not actually the bit you reach the top. It's the 1,000 steps, to get there that really sort of matter. And to be able to not be fooled by success in that moment and to take your foot off the pedal is key. And it's a lesson, sort of hard one. But let's go back to the beginning. So you went to Leeds University?
Yep.
And so talk me a little bit through the sport and the music. These were sort of potential professions for you? Or?
Music was. I'd be lying if I said sport was. I did various sports at school, into school levels. I actually stopped playing. This puts me out, bearing in mind how I look right now. On a limb, but I stopped all sports at the age of 16 to actually focus on bodybuilding, which was even less of a thing back in 1993 as it is right now. But fitness, which is now a huge mainstream activity for people, fitness was not mainstream at all in the 90s. It was very much lad and ladette culture, and I guess from a sporting perspective, having done rugby and athletics for the school, sprinter, then I ended up stopping that because I'd done enough, having got my set of dumbbells and weights as a teenage boy, and kept using them to the point that I was identified as, well, when are you going to do a competition? Well, I don't know. And then suddenly I was switched from being in my hometown to traveling to Western-super-Mare at the time, 4 days a week. And I was being trained by a guy that repeatedly spat out winners for what is a marginal sport. That was an interesting learning curve, just to finish up on that, in that I came from a bubble where everybody thought I was great. And at school, obviously, I was the strongest and all the rest, as well as it was unusual to be fit at school. And then I remember going back to my local gym and saying, "Oh, how are you getting on? Or you must be doing really well," and all the rest of it. And I said it was a shell shock. It was one of my first life lessons in that, from a sporting perspective, is that my trainer literally stripped me down, if you like, because bearing in mind it's bodybuilding, stood there in a pair of undies in a mirror to see what state I was in and what I was going to focus on for the next 12 months. And the reality is I had a naturally overdeveloped chest and shoulders. And because you don't naturally have massive legs, then I had terrible legs. And the simple message was that unless I got, 520s either side on a hack squat machine, which is a disgusting machine, as I'll tell anyone that 20, 30 years on, then I need to shut up because I might have one of the thickest chests around. But you were literally being picked apart based on, I guess, that list of, what was your favorite versus what was your worst. So it was an interesting one because I then spent 6 months completely relearning how to do exercise or individual movements. That was a proper life lesson to apply it into sales. There are lots of people, particularly when time is good, and I'd suggest that the last 10, 15 years we've had good times, who have CVs that say whatever it says on them. But in good times, everybody is successful, but you don't know whether why you're actually successful. And this probably goes back to sales, the traditional point of sales as a professional. But if you know why you are successful, and you have a recipe and a series of exercises, taking it back to the bodybuilding thing, that you know exactly how to do in the optimum way that delivers the optimum response, then you come out on peak performance. And there are very few people that do actually know how to do that. And then if you fast forward 10, 15 years, then you might have sales leadership or even sales professionals with X amount of experience. But actually, do they know when times are tough, and we're in a period of time that essentially we're in a downturn where times are tough or tougher, there will be companies and organizations that will not survive. There will be individuals who thought they were great, but actually don't know how to respond and react when times are tougher. And which makes it a curious one to make the analogy. Flip side on the music, quickly, then I grew up in a musical household. Everybody played the piano. I played the piano and I played the trumpet. Actually, the trumpet was the one that I touched on a moment ago about learning technical exercises. I was a natural performer. I got to the point where I did all the grades. I learned that technical exercises was the route forward about 6 months before grade 8, which is the top grade. And I remember telling my mum 6 months after grade 8, which I'd always assumed was the pinnacle of music talent, that I was probably twice as good 6 months later. And my mum, who had done all the exams on different things before, thought that was a curious point to make. But it was a genuine point because my ability, having learnt the lesson about technical exercises to improve the performance, which is what I loved, had clicked and had gone in, and I'd benefited from it. And 25 years later, I'm still quoting it as a major part of my life. So
it's so, hearing you speak, it's so clear that all your success, be it in sport, in the performance you love, or music, the performance you love, or closing the deal, which is, I imagine, as you say, the best part. It is rested on that, as you said, what you call the basics. Actually, at any one particular day, you can miss the gym, right?
Yeah.
You can, go easy on the hack squat, and maybe you're not going to even notice it the next day, but over a period of time, you will notice it. And when you come to the performance, when you come to the close, you're really going to notice it over time. And it just feels like that consistent message coming through, through your life, really, and brought you the success that you've had. And so from Leeds and from music, from sport, you then become going to telco.
My first job was actually a privately owned business called Touch-Based Communications, and they sold Avaya phone systems and Octel voice messaging platform. But I went off to London, had a series of interviews in various sales roles. And I remember meeting the owner. He was essentially we were finishing sentences of each other. And he explained that actually him and his partner, who I think is he's definitely the founder of Foxtons estate agency in London, that they felt that they could apply themselves in any way to any industry and ultimately be successful. And that's probably in part what I would still take away from that conversation, but also my own personal belief. There's a right way and a wrong way to apply yourself. And if you can apply yourself in the right way, then ultimately you should be able to succeed. The interesting thing about that is that I applied to that job because I think it said business development consultant. And having done a degree in management and sat in a large auditorium for economics in my second or third year, and the lecturer saying to an audience of 300 people, how many of you are going to do move into sales? And 4 people put their hand up, and I wasn't one of them. I remember him saying, you all need to sort yourselves out, because typically 1 in 3 graduates go into a sales career, and in this course then it's even more. But I went into a in-house training academy in touch-based communications, which was really born out of an external piece that they owned a third, Cable and Wireless owned a third, and I think MCI Wilcom owned a third. As it transpires, and 20 odd years on, then we had a lot of world-class coaching and training, highly competitive, but we had 2 people that I call out. One of them that's retired, a guy called Rex Smith, who used to be was in the original Xerox organization at the time of Spin that was created, and Richard Knockholds, who's still going from a consultancy perspective, that I took on board everything that essentially we were taught, and then I translated, I guess, into my style and what would work for me, and embraced it. And I think, just to link it back to sport and music, then one of those lessons growing up was the ability to be coached, and the benefit of learning the benefit of coaching from others, and understanding that you benefit. Now, if you put that into work sense, and right at the very beginning of my career, then that was the ultimate point, that as a professional sales individual, you have a direct benefit from learning and benefiting from others. And as sales is a team sport, certainly enterprise sales, which is, or enterprise B2B sales, which is my career, then it's a team sport, but the seller is the person who has you're sending your name on your P60 or your pay slip. So that's when, between Touchbase and then the next company, which is again a privately owned business, which was Star Internet, became Message Labs Group. At the time, it went on to being the largest tech sale in the UK history at the time to Symantec. But those 2 sales consultants, then also didn't move across, but another customer of theirs was Star Internet. And again, I personally took full advantage of their time. That's where I learned lots of life lessons that actually, with hindsight, I quote back 20 years later. In Star Internet, actually, I do recall someone saying about, when you knew you wanted to, to do this job, Nathan. And I was like, what are you talking about? I didn't dream of selling phones. Or when I was in Star Internet, I didn't dream as a child, as a teenager, about selling antivirus software. What I did click based on the original advert of Touchbase was the idea of being a business consultant, because I learned that kind of business consultant, those couple of words, when I was doing my management degree. And the idea of, I guess, actually 23 years on, then actually the career I actually ended up went into was based entirely on reading an advert in a physical newspaper that said business consultant on it. And I didn't even know it was a sales job, because my parents were teachers, and the perception that I had of selling was literally door to door, selling and high risk. That's what my parents would have told me. And off I trundled to London and then accepted the job for a business consultant that happened to sell telephone systems. Telephone systems was irrelevant. I didn't have a love of phone systems. In fact, I had a hate of phone systems very quickly because it's quite a visual thing to spot leads, opportunities. But that's what got me in it. So that link of saying, oh, well, we talk to people, understand their, their pains and their, and what they want. And if there's an appropriate fit, then you sell what we sell. And then, by the way, you then get a percentage of that sale and you earn money. Okay, that seems good. I can talk to people. I can ask questions, ask more questions. And then, how do you go back to how do you spend your 20 days? So you don't spend time on things that aren't going to be successful. Qualify out early. Explain why you do things. Make sure you do actually do what you say you're going to do. And then I think 20 odd years on, then I am proud of the fact that I have a professional network of however many I have on LinkedIn nowadays. But it's not just a network. I do genuinely believe that the majority of my interactions, then people would come back to me to ask my advice or point them in the right direction, having had a positive experience of when we've actually engaged. And one of my current isms for the region is to, sales is tough enough as it is. Therefore, we can do things today that make tomorrow easier. And tomorrow should be easier, particularly with the way that people prospect and gather information nowadays. The shift of that sales cycle, the vast majority of it is done before they even engage. They may have even made a decision on you before they actually contact you or the company. And we have the internet now, which was kind of just about there, but was suspicious, as I recall in the first company I was in, because they're all about voice. But because of that, then there are things that can be done in your everyday life that makes tomorrow easier.
Yeah. Look, a few things you said there really resonated with me. I mean, again, I think that when you started talking about the sort of the mentors you had early on, it's similar to sport or music. When you see something done well, when you see those that are the best at what they do, they have a kind of an elegance to them, and they're sort of captivating in their own way. And when you see one of those, well, I was going to say salesman, but in a way, sort of business consultant, you see someone who is at the top of their game in terms of not knocking on the door and sort of, trying to force you to buy something, but genuinely showing you the value and consulting with you about the value that a product will have on the business, the way it will help that person get promoted. It will help them not have to go through a round of layoffs, but actually go out and hire, and all these. That's real value, and all done under the pressure of actual, targets and time. And I mean, it's a sight to hold, I think, when you see it done well.
Yes, I mean, it's a curious one to point out, but it is a powerful one. Going back to that, you do have you have additional responsibility as a sales professional above and beyond other roles in the organization. That's not to say that other roles don't have equal or more, but as a revenue generator for a business, whoever you're representing. And I would say as right from the very beginning, then my setting my stall out to the world as Nathan Morris Limited is that I've always represented myself first in the right way, as far as I hope, and then subsequently on behalf of the business that I'm working for at the time. And in doing so, then it comes with additional responsibility, and I do think it matters how you conduct yourself. I do think it matters how you interact with not just external customers, prospects, partners, but also your colleagues internally. Going back to saying it's a team sport, then sellers have to work with and collaborate with lots of other supporting functions, whether it, in our world, pre-sales, maybe it's services team, marketing, legal, deal desk. There's a whole raft of people that you need to engage with to successfully conclude anything, or on an ongoing basis, because nothing's a one-off anymore. then the success is doing something right, doing something well, and setting up the second, third, fourth, fifth piece, because people don't anymore do whopping great big multi-million-pound 5-year projects that in 5 years' time or 3 years' time you find out that there's an output and hopefully it works, because everybody's moving at such a pace and technology is moving at such a pace that there is zero appetite to do that sort of thing. So in today's world, where actually, I guess if you fast forward to, particularly with me in the last 5 years with Sitecore, then moving to essentially a recurring revenue model, rather than selling software and chuck it over your shoulder and someone buys your software based on probably an agency conversation, and they don't care whether they know you or not. Actually, technology has moved on. Technology is simpler to use, therefore technical people don't necessarily need to use it. There is an expectation now that digital is arguably the most number one positive or negative impact on a business. Therefore, customers or organizations have to have the skin in the game. They have to be working based on data and evidence as to doing more of what works and less of what doesn't. Knowing that, going back to that Big Bang piece, then actually people want to put toe in the water first, proof of concepts, or, we'll try this with this level of investment to begin with, prove it works, and then go bigger. The appetite to do that type of engagement is essentially 2020 onwards. That's how organizations want to operate. Can we impact something positively within our own fiscal year and do something in weeks and months versus years and years? No one wants to do something that takes years and years. A total digital transformation might be years and years, but it doesn't negate the point that when they focus on what the priority is, when it's within the scope of work that what Sitecore does, they're all looking to get a positive impact within that 12 months.
Yeah, and so much of the way that you're selling in terms of doing the right thing, growing that reputation, and having that direct relationship is actually far more relevant, I suppose, to Sitecore's current sort of more composable DXP platform, rather than even the organization you joined 5 or 6 years ago. And certainly, as you said, years before that, you would have a software license, and actually you didn't even necessarily need to meet someone from the software vendor. You could do it through an agency partner. But I suppose maybe you could talk a little bit about what does that product look like now, and why is it that you've, in the advent of SaaS and, in the advent of a much more sort of even subscription rather than perpetual license, what does that mean for the kind of relationship you're having with those end clients, rather than just, as you say, sort of, chucking them a license over the fence?
Yeah, good question. I think the funny thing for me is that personally, it doesn't actually change the way that I operate personally, but culturally for this part of the software industry, it definitely is a conscious change. It's definitely a conscious change for Sitecore, the need to mature, just as I said, within organizations full stop, there is a reality check to what their digital experience is post-pandemic or during the pandemic, post-pandemic, then it's now number one. You don't have an excuse. You can't get away with it if you don't address digital experience and make sure that every touch point is maximized and relevant. Then you're not going to succeed, or there isn't a long-term plan for you. So within Sitecore, then I think there was, let's just say for simplistic sake, the best part of 20 years, the license key thrown over your shoulder, maintenance support, perpetual stuff. So pay us a chunk of money for the rights to use our technology, and then a slither for maintenance on an ongoing basis. Going back 20 plus years ago, that was that Martech slide that now is popular that goes around LinkedIn once a year. And I don't know how many thousands of, there must be, 14,000 brands on there at the moment. But the original brands would have probably been the CMS providers, because it was the website. And I can remember when, if you didn't like a particular brand, if you got quick and bought the domain, it was funny, and you could then flog it back to them and all the rest of it. I can remember some older people doing that when I was here, a youngster, starting out. But if you look at that as the anchor point for what then becomes digital experience, then you had a cycle of where IT, or maybe it was the business, because you actually had the office manager who was responsible for the telephone system, who then became the IT manager, or it kind of fused, who then became the IT director, and then they became the CIO, and then the CIO became on the board, and then they realized that maybe they needed a CTO as well as a CIO, and one of them was sit on the board. And then actually IT has become so mature that now it's part of operational costs. So actually you've then in the last 10 years seen the rise of the CMO. So you had marketing manager, marketing director, then you had marketing operations that then fell under this, that then became the CMO. And then the CMO has gone and bought a load of technology, because all of the technology that the IT team bought over the years has been hidden away, locked away, not fit for purpose. Goodness knows what the value is of it, but the perception is it's not fit for purpose. And that is why you have then the creation of all of those, and I'm not to diss any of the brands, because it's, the whole of the industry, including ourselves that are obviously on that slide. But that is the reason why you've had that yearly PowerPoint that goes around LinkedIn with an ever increasing number of vendors, because the original brands of the CMS were locked away by the IT manager, and it was only ever replaced every 6 years when they wanted to rebrand the corporate website. And in the meantime, whether the technology was there to actually do more and solve more of these modern problems as they came along, actually the business started to take control, didn't listen to or didn't accept the answer from the IT department of, oh, we can't do that, or it would take 6 months. Very quickly it's a case of, well, 6 months isn't acceptable to build a landing page, so I'm going to go and buy a marketing automation tool, which is then what you saw, I don't know, between 2010 to 2000 and, well, let's say 2020, when actually everyone was buying marketing automation tools for enterprise. That was the big place. And then you saw other things, other technologies come in as well. All of this was essentially fudging or trying to fix or do better around a simple question around meeting the expectations of our customers. The curious thing now is that people's expectations around digital experience is met by the next best experience that anybody experiences anywhere. Forget industry or anything else. Everybody is a consumer. Someone does something over there, or a children's app or something like that. Suddenly the bar gets raised, and it doesn't matter whatever industry you're in. So how has Sitecore reacted to the fact that the world is modernized, or the world is changing? Expectations from customers are increasing and changing, and being in control of our own destiny. Then how do we change that too? So 5 years ago, then, or approximately 5 years ago, then we essentially sunsetted our route to market with perpetual license model. We moved to a modern subscription model for our licenses. 3 to 4 years ago, then it was a case of, okay, actually customers don't want, yes, they like the subscription model, but actually there's a problem where, as a platform provider, the relationship with a platform provider, far outstretches any relationship with the agency that has a particular specialism at the time. And there's a problem with where the infrastructure sits, which is where 3-4 years ago we started doing platform as a service. So we deliver the license key on top of the platform, and then we've got a nice, neat solution there. The ultimate goal was always then, how do we create a true end-to-end SaaS solution? And so going back to what happened, I guess 3 years ago now, 2.5, 3 years ago, then along with new leadership or exec leadership within Sitecore came the big round of circa £1 billion euro investment, and a series of acquisitions. And those acquisitions reflected the need to deliver modern solutions for the future requirements of our customers or organizations globally. to keep in mind what modern architecture actually looks like. And in order to do that, then ultimately, I think the product team and the exec team realized that there is still the need to deliver our XM and XP license model with circa 4,000 customers worldwide, all very happy on that for an exponential amount of time. But there were problems with perhaps the amount of channels that were available for doing personalization and things, and therefore we needed to look again at that suite. We started with the big question, which is everybody needs to do the right message at the right time to the right person. The channels, though, have increased now beyond digital. If you do personalization correctly, then you have an exponential increase on content. So 4 years ago, then looked at the market, and about a centimetre north and to the right of anybody else for the large enterprise, DAM specifically, was a company called Star Labs, which was integrated 3-4 years ago and is now known as Content Hub. In fact, now it's called Content Operations. That is arguably one of our biggest growth areas at the moment, because again, heightened by the last 2 years where people aren't physically in an office, it exposes the fact that people's ability to create and curate content en masse is not fit for purpose right now. And so we continue to see great success from a content operations perspective. Now, if you can create and curate that content well, then it's a case of, okay, well, what's the delivery method? And then hence this last year, then we've now launched XM Cloud as a pure SaaS play CMS. If you're doing that, then how do you take advantage of the content to ensure that no matter what the endpoint is, you actually serve up relevant content that is actually up to date and consistent, which strangely, the bigger the brand, I'd suggest the bigger the problem actually is, curiously. Then we look at personalization, and then we have Sitecore's CDP and personalize to ensure that the next best decisioning is made correctly there. And then ultimately, if you're looking to actually execute and conclude those engagements with successful selling activities to bring it back to selling, then we acquired 451, which is headless. It was now called Sitecore Order Cloud, but it's headless commerce. So we end up with a series of components that meet modern day purchasing requirements that can fit those, I'm going to say piecemeal, which is probably the wrong thing to say, but whatever the priority is today, it's not going to be everything, almost certainly. So if it happens to be the need to remove a monolithic, massive commerce platform that has turned into or mutated in some beast over the last 10 years and not really fit for purpose, or it's preventing them from, an organization from moving nimbly and quickly with modern day engagements, then Order Cloud is a great fit that can be stood up very, very quickly within days and weeks versus months and years. Likewise, if it's next best decisioning, which for a lot of people right now, that is the case, where they have, truth be told, failed up until now, or even if they've done an amount, it's not fit for purpose for moving forward as customers' expectations increase all the time, then you've got Sitecore, Personalize, and CDP. So we end up with a suite of composable DXP in terms of jargon, that enables us to be able to match requirements, knowing that we almost certainly 9 times out of 10 will be fitting into a pre-existing ecosystem of all those other brands or selections of brands that appear on that PowerPoint.
Just listening to you speak there, it's very interesting to think about that in the context of what we were just talking about as the kind of the young guy looking for a business consultant job. And actually you find yourself in a world now where, as you said, you're not predominantly speaking to IT people interested in technology. You're speaking to marketers who are interested in, or under the pressure of revenue and, interested in business value. And you're no longer just ultimately selling one core product, world beaten though it may be. It's still, you're still XP. You're now talking about a sort of a smorgasbord of different products for different types of business solutions, and trying to understand, to your point, it's not everything at once, and it can't be. It's how do you incrementally deliver value? And it feels like actually that is the very business consultant job that you've been doing the basics for all of this time to get to this place, so that you can actually advise these brands. And I mean, in terms of the types of brands you're working with, they're usually larger enterprise businesses, or Sitecore work with smaller businesses?
Being curious and push-pull scenario that I was talking about, then I think just like any other organization in our space, we had our splattering of big brands versus smaller brands, but household names, world's largest organizations, and as well as modern day disruptors that are perhaps top tech. I don't know if that's even a thing now, but top tech fastest growing companies in region or in country. Moving to a SaaS model has enabled us to do two things. One, move from, say, mid to higher market, where a lot of people thought we might be overkill, or they would like to use Sitecore, but do they have budgets that can actually enable them to do that? Moving to a SaaS model means that you've got economies of scale, which actually means the price point to begin is much lower. That enables us to get into mid-market and be competitive there. Similarly, then we have a sliding scale of tiers, which mean that we can go right up to the largest, world's largest organizations. So by modernizing our go-to-market and slicing up every piece of the pie, it enables us to scale, which then makes it quite a clever place to be.
Personally, I think that for a long time, Sitecore have rightfully positioned themselves and been seen to be the world leader in personalization. And that was ultimately the reason why I think most people, when it came down to it, would choose Sitecore versus alternatives. Is that ability to orchestrate experiences around an individual, to work out the probability of the user at the other end of the channel of the device, to understand who they were, what persona they were, and to be able to serve up the right content at the right time, as you're sort of saying. But now, as you alluded to, the whole idea that you would have a CMS that personalizes as a big monolithic platform is now being atomized into CDP, into the personalized product, into sort of a range of different areas. Do you think that the acquisitions that you've made over the last few years have moved you away from just being the world's best at personalization, or do you think actually it all speaks to that same central message that if you are trying to orchestrate an experience around an individual and give them the type of experience that's going to make them buy or renew or whatever it might be, that's still the fundamental message of Sitecore?
I think the answer is yes to both. And then it depends on the situation and the requirement. And I think, if you look at modern selling, then the art of modern selling, I read a couple of years ago, a suggestion that, the best sellers nowadays can recognize the scenario that you're in. So you recognize tactical, opportunities that perhaps, take a smaller amount of effort, because that is the opportunity that is in front. That is the appropriate way to engage with one hand, whilst understanding the bigger picture and the larger engagement. Maybe strategic engagement works out to be a larger sale or ticket item in the end. And by being able to do both, I think is probably the answer for Sitecore. Moving forward, having that level of flexibility is a clever place to be. Recognizing what type of engagement you are in and qualifying it by asking questions and then asking some more questions is where success comes. Ultimately, executing on engagements that maximize the opportunity at any given moment, or any interaction to cut through that noise has never been more needed to cut through that noise. But it also becomes curious, and I like this, and this might go back to that whole business consultant piece, but I like the fact that personalization traditionally was all about selling. Now, again, modern world, there are lots of industries that aren't allowed to sell, like the finance industry or influence, perhaps. There is a huge focus, and rightfully so, a huge level of value to be able to recognize and leverage the power of personalization through other things outside of purely selling. What do I mean by that? Well, there are a lot of rightfully so hot topics at the moment whereby recognizing, if you're a bank or an insurance organization and you recognize a section of or an individual being vulnerable for whatever reason, being able to recognize that person because of data that's in your CRM or sits somewhere else, and then being able to push the appropriate message to support them or promote the ability to support them is a seriously powerful reason to leverage personalization, not just executing. So as an example, likewise, we have multilingual nation, if you look at purely UK and Ireland, but organizations that work globally as well, being able to recognize whether someone actually has their first language as English or another, and then being able to communicate in that way, because you know that information. So why can you not actually change your experience and that engagement? Knowing that is just joining the dots. I mean, I'd like to say it was smart, but I think it goes back to, how do you differentiate yourself as a salesperson? There's some basic things, if you bothered to do them, that, an organization would just stand out immediately, because most organizations still do not do that. Because you know what? Most organizations aim to be average, and average, just like I've said about the sales industry, aims to do arguably the bare minimum, or what can they get away with? Or if no one else does it, then I don't need to do it. We're at a point at the moment where I think a lot of large organizations are looking at disruptors as to why they are disruptive. And that most of the answers, when people do look at that, it's because they're starting with a blank sheet of paper, which then comes back to, okay, rather than trying to do some big, massive project, then maybe we can act a bit like a disruptor by just taking the next project, the next top of the list priority, and maybe we can do better and challenge the status quo of what we could deliver on that next thing. And if we do that, that will turn ahead. You'll very quickly get a lot of traction from that. The cost of delivery, the time of delivery to get an output is not like it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. The most obvious application for personalization is to attempt to sell at some level. But really, as per this conversation we've been having, what is sales? But it is about change in behavior, right? It is about helping people understand meaning, and so that they can make better decisions. And to your point, yes, that can involve a sort of an end of a process, which is a buy now button or a subscribe button. But ultimately, there's in so many different industries and so many different businesses, their competitive advantage rests fundamentally in getting people to act in certain ways. So it could be a patient in a hospital knowing the right place to go to under pressure in that sort of right context, and the ability to offer them a sort of a personalized experience online. I remember working for the NHS a while ago, and the whole idea of thinking through what is a sort of a clinically defensible sort of, personalized experience, and how do you sort of, bring that to life? We did a project for a large insurer who recruit about 50,000 people a year. And so how do you actually do the same sort of personalization to help find the right performer in that role, and understand, just as you might identify a customer who's more likely to buy, you understand a certain person with the likelihood of a certain skill set, positioned in a sort of a certain geography, looking for a certain role, and how do you intelligently lead them through an experience, showing them the right content so they can actually select themselves in and out to see if it's the right organization for them. And as you said, all of these things can help that individual, as well as reducing costs and creating far more meaningful conversations within the business, I think. But let me reverse the the previous question. What is one of the hardest things I think for salespeople, and for your team now, because obviously you've got a sort of a large team of business consultants, and one of the hardest thing to do is to qualify out of an opportunity. Someone's speaking to you, but they're not quite right. Well, what does that look like? What are the sort of the signs for you that maybe this organization, Sitecore is not the right sort of position for them, and how do you coach your team to understand that early and have the courage to actually have that conversation, so that, to your point about network and reputation, later on down the line, you've earned that trust that when you do have the right product for them, you can position it.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I'm on a steep learning curve of a journey, having moved into this I guess official role. I think it does go back to how do you spend your 20 days, and qualifying out early is doing yourself but everybody else justice. I'm not sure when I say the industry, our organization Sitecore have all had to mature rapidly. I think it's the case if you look at the other side, the buying side, the procurement side. Buyers and budget holders are far more mature as well. And saying no is perhaps far more is met with it lands a lot better than perhaps it did years ago. I remember years ago working for a global wide area network company, telecoms company, and an RFP landing and then finding out that they used to send this RFP every 2 years. Because that's what they did. So I no bid, and then immediately got their noses out of joint because it's your job to bid. It's not our job to bid. Our job is to engage on winnable sales cycles, to put it crudely, but winnable engagements. So in the right sales cycle, having qualified in that we can add value, therefore we do execute, and therefore that's where you begin doing sales excellence. So from a team's perspective, it's kind of a big question. There are lots of different things that can be qualified, from a personal perspective to a technology fit to a background industry check and everything else, and all of the above. But we've had examples in the last year or two where if you get a blind bid RFP, then the reality is that, this is a stat going back to when I began, but it used to be something like 88% of, which sounds like a made up stat, but 88% of all RFPs that are blind get lost. So why would you bid on them? Yeah. Or if you're going to bid on them, and this is what I do say to the team, which I learned from it's probably the last telecoms company I worked in actually, but if you are going to bid on them, then you have to challenge the status quo, which is if you think it's technically a very, very good fit for you, then we need certain things from you, Mr. Customer, Mr. Prospect, to warrant the cost and time we're going to put in to do this, because we'll do this to win it. What does that mean? Well, we will need to spend X amount of hours over, let's say, 2 or 3 workshops with the appropriate execs and stakeholders to map out exactly what you want, so that we can be on a level playing field with the person or people or organizations that have influenced you to write that RFP document. Because whether you admit it or not, it's obviously been influenced by other people than us. And if you're not going to do that, then we'll no bid. If you are going to do that, brilliant. Actually, if you are going to do that, I'm going to suggest you should do that with the other people that you put the RFP out to, because that would probably save you a lot of time and money, and you get loads more out of it to get around the table and workshop your requirements through, versus having someone fill in a however many X hundred RFP document where, if they're good sellers, they'll answer them properly because they think they can win the opportunity, and if they're bad sellers, they'll answer yes to everything because they think that's how you win a bid. But also you have to challenge the status quo, and you have to be honest. You have to be honest with yourself. I do We do have a process in place where we do review projects. There's happy ears from sellers. It's easy to say yes to something without remembering the level of involvement, engagement through all of that supporting group. That's before you even then go out another level and talk about partners that you're going to get engaged with. Do you have the right partner to bring to life what you are setting them up for? Because the clever bit from a partner perspective in the ecosystem that we obviously operate in is that we will sell a platform that's currently empty. So part of our submission and our do we bid or not is, do we have the right partner that could bring to life in a above and beyond, elevating from the average, answering the questions? Can you bring to life something that is disruptive or, stand out, incredible, to a platform that begins empty? That the choice of partner, or who are you thinking to engage? Because our job is to ensure that customers and prospects make decisions based on knowledge. And if they make decisions based on knowledge, then we can't really ask for much more that, but we have to do that. So ensuring that someone is a Sitecore partner, great, they fit the right time in terms of the ability to matching the criteria of ABC partner or horizontal, but then also is the partner up for doing this? Because I want to challenge the partner in the same way as I challenge myself or now the team. If we do this, it will take time, effort, money, whether it's quantifiable or not. It does. Resource and time and everything else is not infinite. It's limited. Therefore, if we decide to do it, we have to be in it to win it. So there's a massive effort, a massive part of that whole qualifying piece comes from the partner element as well, more so than probably is talked about. To be fair,
yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people they don't always understand is, even when they're buying software, clients aren't really buying just software. They're buying a relationship. They're entering a relationship, and they need to be able to look at you as the representative of Sitecore, and someone like myself as representative of a partner, horizontal or other partners available, and say, is this the person that on a rainy Tuesday in October, when something happens, they're going to get it done? And likewise, over the relationship they have, where clients, even in the world you're talking about now, where implementations don't take 3 years, it's a much quicker sort of flash to bang and sort of return of value. But still, they don't have an infinite number of goes at this. They get 1, maybe 2 goes. And if they get those relationships wrong, then that's them and that's their career. And so they're investing in people as much as they are actually buying a software key. And I think that's one of the hardest lessons to actually sort of to learn as well as a sort of a salesperson or a business consultant. And it speaks to the very first thing you started talking about do the basics well, say what you're going to do, then actually go ahead and do it, and establish that permission to speak and to have that sort of long-term relationship and establish that value. So with a few minutes left, I want to ask you a couple of questions. So you get 20 days a month to focus on. If you won the lottery tomorrow or the pools, is the pool still a thing? I don't know.
Not down south.
I don't know. Maybe there's a website for it. But
am I allowed to say that anymore?
I don't know. But pools used to be a thing. There used to be a guy come around the door and sort of, anyway.
Don't spend the next 2 minutes talking about the pools.
Let's say you won the lottery or you won the pools, and you didn't have to worry about money anymore. What would you spend your 20 days a week or 20 days a month on?
I would, unlike my wife, I would continue working. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family of workers, doers. I roll my sleeves up and like achieving things. I do not like. I find it so boring and uninspirational to not challenge the status quo and see what can be done. So if I won the pools tomorrow, then I'm sure I would either look to invest in Sitecore, or I'd look to invest in other organizations or set something up on my own. But ultimately, I would be looking to drive a business forward where you add value and that you can deliver on what you say you can do, and see what the art of the possible would probably be in that scenario. And that essentially, I guess, is why I've had a 20-something career in selling as a business consultant, because targeting yourself, challenging yourself, knowing that average is boring. Why would you be average? It's just makes me cringe to think about being average. Trying to deliver something better. It's not about I don't know. I kind of think at 45, coming on 46, I'm halfway through my career, if you like. And you start thinking about these sorts of things, and you think, I've got friends now that are a bit older than me and looking to retire or have retired and things. And actually, if you come back to, without getting too heavy, if you then look forward to the next 20 years and go, okay, what type of imprint will I have from a legacy career perspective? I don't want to be ticking a box that I turned up to work for 40 years and then retired, if I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that, or make it that far. I want to be able to turn around and go, actually, I did have an impact. In whatever I applied myself to, I did do a positive impact. And wherever I went in, I left knowing it was in a better place. And so in a roundabout way, moving from sales professional to sales leadership, then now the game's changed slightly for me. It's a different trajectory. I don't see it as a promotion. I see it as a change of career, but I've got whether I like it or not, I've got quite a lot of years behind me and of best practice. And that is of value to a wider group of people. And if I can impact that to being a region of Sitecore, and getting a group of, a dozen people to better themselves and impact a larger group of organizations through others, then I find that particularly attractive. And perhaps, I could sit back wherever my career goes in that second half with a bit of a wry smile, thinking, well, that wasn't bad, which I hope might happen.
So my final question, there was a famous physicist called Richard Feynman, and one of his the things he got asked, I once read, was if the world's knowledge were to be destroyed and he could only pass on one sentence, one fact, one insight to whatever the generation that comes next, what would he do? What would he pass on? And the insight he passed on was that things are made of atoms. He felt like if he could convey that to the next generation or the next species, then actually they would be able to unpack that. So summing up your career and thinking about the type of, if you could only pass one insight or one sort of sentence, one word of advice onto, your team or your daughters, what would be that sort of insight that you would give them to help them have a successful career?
Well, that's a difficult one.
One thing.
One thing. I thought I've already got four. One thing. I think I don't know whether it's insight, but I think from a daughter's perspective, as well as general advice, I'd go back to saying average is not clever. I mean, it's not, by definition, it's not clever. Any industry or career you choose to do not, or going back to music and sport and all the rest of it, do not aim to be average. Average is not something to be high-fived, in my opinion. And so aim to be the very, very best. Aim to do a distinction in music, or, the top team, or aim for I think my dad once said that I probably at a point where I was probably chest out thinking I was great at something. And he quickly pointed out, I think it was athletics, and he quickly pointed out that there's always another level to go up. Unless you're world champion, there's another level to go up. And as I never became world champion at anything, he was quite right. Which meant that you have not reached the pinnacle of what you're focused on. So you can always be better, and you'll always meet someone better. you apply that to work, and I think, why you need to aspire to be better, and do not settle for the status quo. And whether it's in Sitecore or in any other organisation, or my daughters, then whatever people do normally in their job, aim to break the mold, aim higher. If the average deal size in your organisation is £200,000, then get the next £300,000 one and break that mold.
Yeah, whatever the market is, it's your job to outperform it.
Yeah.
You've been anything but an average and boring interview subject.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You've been great, and I really appreciate you sharing all this time with us and talking us through all these insights. So thank you very much for being here, and we will put your details in the show notes if anyone wants to reach out and contact you. But thanks so much for being here, Nathan.
Yeah, thanks, George. It's been great.